Nigeria has been said to lack adequate support for mortgage institutions to reduce the country's huge housing deficit. CNBC Africa's Umu Ibrahim caught up with Hassan Usman, the managing director of Aso Savings, at the Nigeria Housing Exhibition and Conference in Abuja to get more on what should be done to recapitalize the mortgage banks and provide housing for its citizens. Take a look.
As a practitioner in the housing finance sector, I think that housing should probably rank, maybe apart from agriculture, should rank second. For several reasons. We have an acute housing shortage in Nigeria. At least about 16 million housing units are required just to give decent, affordable accommodation to Nigerians. Providing that kind of stock of housing will create jobs. Our estimates are that if we were to create at least 500,000 jobs over the next 4 years or so, we'll create at least about 1 million jobs. Yeah? So that will be huge stimulus in terms of job creation. Huge stimulus in terms of even just the multiplier effect, because you have a lot of people in the chain. Cement manufacturers, furniture makers, all the technical skilled people, different artisans, etc., paint manufacturers and so on and so forth. So I think that housing can have a really huge impact on the Nigerian economy. If you look at medium income economies across the world, of which Nigeria aspires to be one of, the housing sector accounts for anything between 10 to about 30% or so of their GDP. In Nigeria, it's barely 1%, it's less than 1% of the GDP. So in terms of growth potential, there's an immense scope for growth. We have just not been able to get our acts together as a nation to drive housing. For me, getting the act together requires some kind of a coalition involving the government, involving the private sector, involving developers, everybody basically coming onto the same page and just driving development of housing. So is it an acute problem? I think it is. Is the government aware how acute it is? I think very much so. Has it had the level of attention it requires? Possibly a bit more could be done.
Well, how well do you think our mortgage, institutions has helped in terms of offering a cheap mortgage to, potential house owners?
Frankly, and I'm embarrassed to say so, not a great deal. Not a great deal, because there's certain structural impediments. Number one is that the mortgage banks themselves are not adequately capitalized. Yeah, there are quite a few, but they're not capitalized enough to actually support the kind of housing finance requirements we have as a nation. So we need to have a lot more better capitalized mortgage banks. We need to have the commercial banks also involved in providing mortgages. We need to have the stronger laws in place to enable foreclosure. Why is foreclosure important? I think if we have a better foreclosure process, it means that if I lend you money to go and buy your house, in the event you default, as a last resort, I can actually go and take over the house and sell it and recover my money. Why is that important? If you're an investor, you want to know that wherever you put your money, you can get your money back. So if you know that if you put your money into housing, there's a mechanism through which you can get your money back. It'll incentivize you to put a lot more money into housing. So my takeaway really is that with a bit more clarity on the legislation side, better guidelines, we will see a lot more funding come into the sector, and that will enable the mortgage banks to better support housing finance, better support mortgage creation. But right now we're really talking at the periphery. We haven't even started scratching the surface of the potential demand.
Recently, the government has mentioned it plans to, deliver 500,000 housing units between now and 2016. Now, how realistic do you think this is, and what funding initiatives are there in place to ensure that this is actually achieved?
I think it's very realistic. I think if you break it down, you're talking about doing about 125,000 houses per annum over the next 4 years or so. As a nation, without any kind of concerted effort, we have been doing between 40 and 50,000 houses per annum for the last 10 years or so. So with a bit more government involvement, with a bit more incentives, with governments providing new lands where developers can develop houses, with better building technologies that can allow you to mass produce houses, we can reach that number. Yeah? It requires significant political will to drive that agenda. I think that for the first time in a very, very long time in this country, we're beginning to see that will. We're beginning to see that coalition come together. On the federal government side, we've seen so many new initiatives over the last 6 to 8 months or so. We've seen the government fund promoting the development of Mortgage Refinancing Corporation. We've seen the World Bank getting involved, IFC getting involved. The banks, again, better capitalize. So I think that it is very doable. I think on the funding side, it'll be a bit of a stretch, but we can raise the money required. We're talking anything between 16 to about $20 billion. I think it can be raised over the next 4 years. The challenge that I see more than anything else is actually having a good enough stock of skills required in terms of the engineers, in terms of the architects, in terms of the trained artisans, plumbers, electricians, and so on and so forth. But if a scheme is put in place for very good vocational training, that deficit could actually be addressed. So I think it is very doable. I think it requires tremendous will, and I think the coalition we're trying to assemble can provide that push.